Welcome to Turmeric and Tequila with your host, Kristen Olson. Questioning a better way, one gracefully disruptive conversation at a time.
Welcome to Turmeric and Tequila. I'm very excited to be here with you today. We've got an incredible human in the mix and a cause close to my heart. We are going to be welcoming the Dr. Paul R. Lawrence to the TNT mic. He is a longtime human of service. He was in the military. We're going to share his full bio, but he's got a great book coming out that we're going to dig into and talk about how we can show up better for our veterans in business. He's a consultant, so we're going to unpack it all. But before we do, we got to give some love to our sponsors. A special shout out to Lux Neuro. They are offering neurofeedback and counseling where your heart and mind align. For more information about what neurofeedback can do for you, listen to the neurofeedback stories of transformation in the middle of this podcast. Neurofeedback effectively treats everything from insomnia, anxiety, depression, trauma, ADHD, and much more. Optimize your brain. Check them out. And we always have to give a special shout out to Declan James Watches. They are also veteran owned, Navy SEAL, fellow CrossFitter. 10% of all their sales kick back to the Navy SEAL Foundation. So go check them out. If you were following any of my social medias, we just gave one of these to my dad for his retirement. So they're entering the Olsen family on all levels. We're excited to promote them and what they have going on. Very special humans in the mix. Without further ado, Paul, let's jump into you. He is a veteran-focused organizations. He helps veteran-focused organizations overcome what and how to address roadblocks while saving money. He's an author, and like I said, he's a longtime human of service. So, Paul, welcome to Turmeric and Tequila.
Hey, it's great to be with you. Thanks, Kristen.
Yes. I'm excited to jump in. And TNT, we usually start with where you started in your story. So, can you give us a little bit of background about you as a young person?
Sure. Let's see. So I grew up in an Army family. My father was in the Army for a long time. I was actually born in Japan. We lived in Europe a lot. I lived in Germany and in Belgium. So by the time I was 18, I'd spent about 6 years of my life, a third of my life overseas, right? So it was really cool and exciting. And so from there, I went to college. I became a consultant, but I also served in the military. I did my ROTC requirement. I was in the Army myself for a short period of time. And then after being a consultant, I was in the first Trump administration as the Undersecretary for Benefits. So I learned all about the benefits veterans have earned. I got to administer and watch over and make sure veterans got the things that, is part of the draw for service, right? As you enlist, you get exciting opportunities, hopefully competitive pay, but afterwards you get a series of benefits that can really help your life. So I learned all about those, and part of why I ended up writing a book was I just got lots of questions about these things. So I really wanted veterans to realize these are all here and can really change the trajectory of your life.
I love that. I love when they have humans that have actually lived and walked in it, then facilitating the business side, because that doesn't always happen. And even in our government situation right now, whatever side you're on, we're bringing in people that don't necessarily have deep background experience in any which way you feel. Being an athlete, I always love learning from fellow athletes. And I feel like those deep ethos really, really matter. And I have two brothers of service, one Marine, one Army Special Forces. And I've seen how the system from an outsider has not always showed up for them in the way that I wish it would have. So I love having advocates like you that have lived it and then are advocating personally and professionally to make this process a better one in the government and in businesses. So tell me, like, once after your service and you're in the administration, what made you so particularly passionate about, outside of your own service, but so passionate about diving in and really trying to make a difference on the front lines, no pun intended?
Well, no, it's actually really funny because you have this moment where you sit on the outside and you get frustrated, sort of like you're describing your brother's experience. You go, why can't this be any better? Those knuckleheads, and then suddenly you get the opportunity to say, hey, would you like to go and actually try to do this? So you have this moment of, well, what the heck? I might as well go. I can't sit on the outside and complain anymore. So my feeling was, I've got to go in and try. And if I'm not successful, it won't be because I haven't tried and won't devote all my energy to it. And so what I realized is you can make a difference. The upside was when you see what you could do, and the downside was when people would complain and you'd realize, oh my goodness, the bureaucracy did what? And then suddenly it was like, oh, well, I'm in charge of this. So I've got to go figure out how this came to be. But it was one of those things where it's like, step up, because you just can't sit on the sideline anymore and complain.
Let's go. What a powerful message right now. Obviously, we're talking about our people, our minimum of service and the military, but this is applicable, especially in this day and age. We're in 2024. This will probably come out in 2025, but this is the day and age where you need to step up. And if you have something to say, you got to say it, and you got to advocate for your people, because now's the time where we need to do something about whatever it is that is pulling at your heartstrings. So this is a great conversation, whatever background you're in, of taking action. Like, now is the time to really take action. Coming out of the professional world, it's really hard to identify what your purpose is, know what you want to do, but then lean in and like write a book about it. That's pretty tough to know that process, because it's a whole different process to do the book thing. Tell me about some of your first steps. So like, okay, I know what I want to do. I got my mission here. I'm going to write a book. What was step one to make this happen?
Well, what I realized was, it actually kind of back up, was I actually was kind of indifferent on writing this book, right? So I'd answered a lot of questions. If you sort of go back in time, in 2020, during the pandemic, what happened was, in this job when I was in government, prior to the pandemic, I would travel a lot, go see different offices, talk to people, talk to veterans group, answers questions. But in 2020, you couldn't travel, as you recall, but veterans still needed information. So I started doing telephone town halls where you would, engage veterans in a state. And thanks to the miracle of technology, you could actually call out. You get this phone call and say, press 1 if you want to be in this phone call. So you could do this at a huge scale. So it was not uncommon to have 50,000 veterans on the phone call at any one time. Yeah, I did 110 of these. According to the technology, like 5.7 million veterans were engaged, right? And so
Wow.
what I would do after a while, because you didn't want to hear me talk, right, is I would answer questions. Press 1 if you want to have a question. Some would come on. In the hour, I could probably get to 15 questions. So about 1,500 questions. And this went from like April of 2020 to December of 2020. So like 3 or 4 times a week, I would do this. So you heard the same questions over and over again after a while, right? And then when I realized, when I got out, I said, well, there must be a book that explains all these things, right? Because the questions were so obvious. How could this not be? I looked around, there wasn't a book. If there was a book, it was written by lawyers, and we love them to death, but they write in incomprehensible ways. Nobody could understand it. And they were all the benefits in one book. So you had to get 6 books to figure it out. And so that's when I said, there's got to be a book here. And then all I had to do was think through, what questions did I answer? What were people really trying to do? They didn't want, a PhD in these things. They just wanted to know, what is it? How do I use it? How do I get these things that I've earned? What's the fastest way to do it? So that was kind of my starting point. And from there, it was just a matter of kind of going through all the benefits and writing in a way that I could understand it, that I think people would want to read about it.
I love that. And that mirrors so many. I mean, this really resonates with me, because that's how my health and wellness world is. We don't, most of my people, I'm fellow consultant, don't need to know the minutia of the ins and outs of macros and breakdowns and proteins. It's like, what is your suggested strategy? What should I watch out for? They want like the cliff notes in what it is. So I think what you're doing is you pull the meat out and then you give it in this digestible fashion, is another takeaway for any genre. But I'm very curious, like, because veterans, it's a hard space to navigate, especially if you're a civilian like myself, where I see it through the lens of my brothers or someone I care about, but it's not my personal experience. And I think whatever way you voted, all of our Americans are very much behind our troops, and we want the best for our veterans. And it doesn't always look that way. What were some of the main things of those questions, or just over your experience, that you learned that we're really missing and that we can do better? I know that's a very large general question.
Sure. So kind of like take a step back. So your point is, you're right. People don't want to know, right? They say, look, I've served. I want to go to college because the GI Bill pays for college if I've served 3 years honorably, right? And I want to go on with my life, maybe with a much better job thanks to college. I don't want to have to fight the bureaucracy to figure out, am I eligible to go to college and whatnot. So we need to think about the end goal. Maybe like when you're, working with athletes, they want to be really good. They don't want to know about all the stuff they need to do. They want to be really good at what they do. And it's the same kind of thinking. But often people would stumble because they say, I don't understand the process, like what's required of me. I don't understand what pieces of paper I need to produce. And sometimes I don't understand why people say no to me. Like, I think I've done everything right. Please explain this to me. And I just want to go through the system as easily and as fast as possible so I can go do and take advantage of the things. Get an education, purchase a home with no money down, get assistance if I've hurt myself. It's too much time is spent on the process, on the organization, not on what's supposed to happen, which is people serve and they get out and their life, accelerates. It's not blocked or thwarted. It's better off because they have served. So I spent a lot of time thinking about how do you help people get to yes? How do you help them move through this and really enjoy the benefits?
That's amazing. And a tool where all that information is there, I think is really great. With the upside of social media and like clubhouses or platforms where you can connect is amazing. But the flip side is there's so much information out there. And so it's hard to find out what's true or sift through what is, something that they might be a side off that's selling you something that's not actually the place. Like it's really hard to navigate these spaces. So I think it's wonderful that you put everything in this compiled space. I do have a question because there's policy and forms and like GI Bills. And there's this major question of mental health and getting out of military that I've seen personally that I'm very passionate about. And my brother had a TBI, and we've gone through a lot of things to help facilitate, him moving forward. But it's still been a journey. Do you lean into any of the mental health or community groups or anything like that?
No, I really go through the monetary benefits because I think that those are hard enough unto themselves. My
Yeah.
general rule of thumb for folks, especially with mental health or things, is get to the VA, right? You must come and connect with the VA. There's lots of programs. It's not like it used to be before. I know a lot of veterans who maybe 5, 7 years ago say, I don't want to go to the VA. They just give me drugs. I don't like that. There's many more therapies coming online. And a lot of folks, hey, it's called bad paper. I didn't get an honorable discharge. Can I still go? Yes. If you have mental health issues, you've got to connect. There's other programs as well, but I think folks are learning more about mental health. And so, no, I didn't really cover that because medicine, I think, is so personal, whereas
Yeah.
benefits are sort of a process. So I really tried to explain. And the two do connect, but I do encourage people throughout this, talk to the VA because that's what it's here for.
That's great. Well, I think disrupting that narrative of, there's fear around that and the drugs and the medication. That's my background. I know big food, big pharma. There's always that can be a whole podcast in itself. But I love that you're disrupting the narrative of it is new and there are evolving. Neurofeedback, our sponsor, I know that's evolved in them. That's a great science. And there's 30 years old plus. So there's some great things and newer trend setting things that are happening that are really cool. I also love that you do stay in your lane because knowing these processes can or not knowing them can directly impact your mental health. If you're not getting the funding you need or the support, it's very significant.
Right. And people get frustrated. I don't think people realize is like, okay, so it's just a bureaucracy. Yeah, but the folks on the other end might have PTS, right? They might be triggered by this. They just want to go through this and, move on with their life. And so it's got to be more helpful. It's got to be easier. It's got to be faster. So there's a lot of challenges still that remain.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and have you seen some direct impact? Have you heard back from veterans like, this really helped me, this specific thing helped me navigate this, or because of this, I got the GI Bill and I went to college? Have you already had some immediate
Yes,
feedback?
I have. So I've gotten a bunch of those. And I guess the compliments that I'm most proud of, this was easy to read, right? Because I didn't want it to be like I said, and everything's in one book. And to be honest with you, the book's on Amazon is less than $20. So you can do this, file a few forms, you get thousands of dollars. You'll more than pay for this, right? And then I've also heard, which is really compliment, I gave this book to older veterans in my life because back in the day, a lot of veterans, it wasn't as cool to be a veteran coming out of Vietnam in the early 80s even. So they just are like, I'm checking out. I don't want to have anything to do with the VA. So this has enabled them to better understand what's still available and how to get in touch and access it.
That's incredible. Well, we have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this show, and whether they're, big business or, kind of small stuff on Amazon or Etsy, I think the entrepreneurship angle is critical, and us as individual entrepreneurs can always help facilitate some of these processes or be knowledgeable so we can help veterans that maybe work with us or work alongside us or family members. How are you consulting some of these small and large businesses on things that they can do better to support our veterans?
Yeah, this is a really important question, Kristen, because a lot of people want to be a lot of companies veteran friendly because it really helps them recruit. but they haven't really thought through what that actually means so they can recruit veterans. And what happens sadly is veterans will leave between 12 and 18 months after they've had the job because they don't feel connected. So I try to remind them of what it's like, right? Do you have mentors? Do you have people who understand? So, for example, imagine your brother, the special force, he eventually leaves and goes join a company, and they send him to Outward Bound, 2 days in the woods climbing mountains. Like, you can't be serious to not realize what his experiences have been, right? Or they treat these people who've had tremendous responsibility like every other employee who's just learning how to manage, who's learning how to do stuff. So they get frustrated and they leave. So you really need to understand that journey and access the real skills. The other thing I'm very frustrated with is company leaders, you know, who work with veterans are often not veterans. So, oh, I'm in charge of you'd be surprised. I'm in charge of your veterans group, your affinity group. Oh, really? Are you a veteran? No. Well, this is a problem, right? And so you got to kind of think that through. So I remind companies that your investment in veteran will equal what you get out. If you make a low investment, you'll be pretty unhappy. But if you make a solid investment, you would be surprised. And of course, we know veterans tend to be top employees in almost any place they go if given the right kind of support and, not micromanage is the best way to say it. Let them go do their thing. And so the really good companies understand this. And so that's what I remind them, because you'd be surprised. If you don't know, you don't know. And
Right.
that's where they struggle.
I completely agree that those deep ethos of actually having walked the walk to then lead people that have also walked the walk is so important. And we talk about this with diversity and inclusion and whatnot. Like, you need someone that's actually walked in it to do it and be part of the table and then address it to be that leader. And if you've ever been a high achiever or human of service or anything, you're only really going to follow if you believe in them and you know that they know what they're
Right.
saying. So it's not going to work if it's not someone that's authentically walked that space. And it's really critical. And I love that you made the point that they're great humans to have on the team and to work with. And I would say this similar to athletes. We've already developed these life skills through other things that then make us better team members, make us more aware, make us
Right.
more self-productive and
Right.
meeting deadlines. Like, I agree with you. It's more than worth the investment because you have really great people that are already trained in life to be a good employee and good teammate.
Right. Just think about what you want. Employees that are familiar with ambiguity, right? They know how to lead and follow, right? They're mission focused. They'll come early, they'll stay late because they know stuff needs to be done. Now, on the flip side, we also have to remind veterans it's okay to speak up for yourself because they've been part of teams. They generally aren't the ones with sharp elbows advocating for themselves and being to the so sometimes they get left behind, and that's kind of frustrating. So you got to have a little bit of both, which is it's okay in the private sector to talk, advocate for yourself and the like. But yeah, no, it's just a matter of understanding. And again, the very best companies know this, and they go, some of them just say, listen, all I want to do is hire veterans because I
Mhm.
know how good this can be.
Absolutely. It's yeah, for the big ones that know, it's almost like a good kept secret. I would say it's different, but similar to athletes. Like, go get
Yeah.
your Division 1 athletes that know how to do this and commit, or former pros, or what have
Yeah.
you. Uh, I,
Yeah.
I love talking about the business side of things and your mission, but I always want to hear more about the human behind the mission. So I'm very curious. Do you have any stories or like specific experiences where it was like a breakthrough for you, where you're like, okay, I need to get this out there. I really want to advocate for my veterans. Was it one point in time where, like, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and you shifted gears?
Well, so I knew that having been in government, what I was really interested in was telling the story because I previously wrote another book just before this one. I wrote another book about what was my experience in government, because you hear a lot about, you get to government, it's really hard. You can't fire people. Well, I did. You can't do anything. Well, I did. Can't get them going in the right direction. So I really liked talking about government management, right? But then I noticed on social media what people were asking me about was these benefits, right? They were like, oh, even though you're no longer in government, can you help me with this? Can you help me with this? And that's when I realized that, oh my goodness, why are they asking me these questions? There is no other source of information. So it was kind of like, the sort of, imaginary hammer hitting me in the head going, wake up. Do you realize kind of what you're seeing? So it was simultaneously disappointing, right? Why is there not information out there? And then the realization that, well, kind of like before, I better write it because I understand it. I've had to
Yeah.
answer these questions for the better part of 3 years. I had to figure all this stuff out because I didn't know it when I went in. I had a general idea, but I didn't know the details. And now I did. So it was one of those things where it just kind of happens and you realize, you know, what the heck? Let's get this out there for folks so that people are aware of, the possibilities.
That's incredible. I hope anyone listening, my creators, my entrepreneurs, my people that take action, if you feel that need, if you see a gap in the system, take action to step up and fill that gap. Not only can it be lucrative monetarily, but I feel like it's very opportunistic in line of purpose of your life. Like show up, there's some sort of calling, whatever you believe, showing
Yeah.
you where you have purpose and where there's meaning, and you can help provide a solution.
Right, and I would even say, you don't even have to see it. In my example, it just kinda came to me. These people just asking me questions. "Hey, how does this work? Can you help me with this?" So it's even just sort of listening, right? Because at first I was like, "No, no, no, I'm not so certain I wanna write this book," right? And then I said, "Well, I better because people need this," right? And so that was kinda how it sort of all came into focus.
Absolutely. I feel like you gotta have a plan in life. You gotta let go just enough for, like, opportunity to slither in and be like, "Oh, a light bulb. Okay, maybe I can do
Yeah.
this." Writing a book is a whole process, and I think this other great intel for our listeners. What was your first step in being like, "Okay, I'm gonna write a book because there's an idea, there's grasping hold of it, and then you're like, "Well, shoot, what's step 1?"
Yeah. Well, I'm a big believer in outlines. So you sort of go, okay, what would the outline of this book be? How would I present this information? Right. Well, the benefits kind of story was easy. There's like, I don't know, 12 benefits, let's say. So you go 12 chapters, right? But then you realize along the way, there were a lot of questions people would ask. Am I eligible? What forms do I need? What about this? What about that? What about that? So then you had to realize, well, how do you take them into this conversation? What are you not going to cover? Because the details are overwhelming. You could have this like enormous book, right? What are you not going to cover?
Yeah.
And then what really matters? Like how do people get help and the like? And then of course you have to work back. So this book, I work with a publisher. They actually contacted me and said, let's write a book. Well, when you sign a contract, they do say, we would like the book to be so many thousand words, like 40,000 words. So then you have to go, well, okay, how do I get to 40,000 words? Okay, each chapter will be about this long. This will be about this much. Okay, that's my vision. And then you sit down and say, okay, how am I going to do this? Well, I probably need to do this in like 3 or 4 months. That means every day I have to write 500 words. So you sit down and you go to work at 8 o'clock in the morning. And some days I'd come out of my little office and I'd have written like 700 words and I'm going, good. Other days I'd have written 70. And you sit here and go, and there's this clock. And it's like, okay, how am I going to fulfill all these obligations? So it actually is a management problem. Now, I think some
Mhm.
people are great writers. They tell great stories and they can do whatever. But this was much more like a reference book. So you had to figure out what you want to present. Can anybody understand this? Is it presented in a general way so that someone get there? So yeah, it's a real project. It's a real project.
Yeah, but you did a great job of kind of reverse engineering it and taking it, here's the end game, how can I break this up? And then going step by step. And again, I think that's another great metaphor. How do we approach, all
Yeah.
these big questions in our life? We might not have the answer or the book right away, but you can break it
Yeah.
up into pieces.
Right. That's exactly right. And the other thing too is along the way, the really enjoyable part was I learned stuff, right? Let's
Yes.
say I knew something at like two levels deep, but you really have a solid explanation. I had to go learn the third level. I had to better understand an exception. I had to better understand something. So it was actually fun in a weird kind of nerdy way to
Yeah.
like be really good at this, right? And so when somebody says something from time to time, I go, well, actually, there's a little more detail. There's a little more history behind that. So, in a narrow vein, it's an inch wide and a mile deep, and that's kind of how I think about it.
There you go. Perfect segue because I started this podcast to disrupt, marketing and all the smoke and mirrors in it, and it was for the people. And I have learned so much in every single conversation. It's been a takeaway for myself. So it's been such an incredible piece of my journey. How has this book and this process and just showing up for your fellow humans of service provided purpose and/or mental health for yourself?
Well, I would definitely say the mental health is enjoy helping somebody, right? Because when people are struggling, and often it wasn't just like I'm kind of struggling a little bit. It's I have been struggling a long time, and I get a random email, and you'd read it's paragraphs long, and you just feel for the folks that oh my goodness, this is terrible. So it's really satisfying to be able to help, but it's also given me a window into okay, this book has been pretty successful. I think there's actually another book about veteran employment, right? And what that and so I'm kind of I'm trying to figure out if I want to climb the mountain again to use your athletic kind of analogy. It's like, do I have the energy to do this again? Because I do think I now have a lot more to say about veteran employment and what it means. And so I'm thinking another book might be in the offing, which I
Very
had not
cool.
imagined before this.
Yeah. Well, again, you got to let go just enough to see what happens because we can be intentional, especially in the academic world, goals
Yeah.
and outlines and things, but also, things life happens and you lean
Yeah.
in. And has this facilitated community? I mean, two pillars of our podcast are mental health and community. Have you like kept in touch with like these millions of humans you talk to digitally or book buyers or anything like that?
Yeah, so it has brought about community. So I don't use much on social media, mostly LinkedIn, and that's really gotten a lot of veteran followers, a lot of veteran information. I started making short videos about things I learned and engaging others about programs they offer. There's a lot of nonprofits that do pretty amazing things for veterans at virtually no cost, right? They're tremendously helpful, and their missions kind of overlap. So I'm really trying to identify the programs and resources that are also available. So I do know people from time to time say, "Hey, I've read your post, I've seen your videos, I've done whatever." And that makes me really satisfied because that's the whole point, right? I
Yeah.
don't want anything for it. I don't charge for these things. It's much more satisfying to share the knowledge and know, hey, these are things you've earned. Let me help you, and others will help you too get them so you can go on with your life.
I love it. In this day and age, influencers have such a dirty word and like it's a hard connotation, but if people understand that influencers are inspirers or people that just care and want to share intel and or their path or their learnings, you are influencing and inspiring someone to take action or to make a change for the better or whatever it may be. But these things, whether it's a t-shirt or a video, it's impactful. People are paying attention way more than you think, and there's opportunity for positive impact all over the place. And I think if you just show up and do the good, do what you can and provide solution where you can, I always think it comes back full circle, monetarily, energy, whatever.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, and it's exciting to work with people who are doing their version. Hey, here's how I help veterans. Here's what I do, and you're like, wow, that's pretty clever. I'm glad
Yeah.
I learned that. And somebody will say, blah blah blah. Say, oh, you ought to talk to those guys. They're doing something interesting, right? And so it's really kind of out there, and you see people working on important problems, interesting people doing things around homelessness, right? Around food insecurity. And you're like, wow, that's admirable. I don't know that I would have the passion to do what they do at that kind of detail and rolling up their sleeves and whatever. But it's great to know there are people like that that you can refer others to, for example.
Absolutely. Well, and then that inspires you because we can't do all the things. Like we got to show up for the thing we're good at, and then
Right.
you build your team. This person's good at people experiencing homelessness or food insecurity, and I can do veteran affairs, and I can do podcasting, and like we can all take our space because just like a team or a village, like you need different people doing different things because there's a lot of issues to cover.
Right, and the trick is to connect it because everybody, one of the things I always talk about people is like, how do you get started? It's like ask another veteran. All veterans want to help generally, but they especially want to help other veterans. And I regularly tell stories to people. They say, yeah, I said, listen, I remember every time I asked a veteran for help, especially when I was beginning a journey, looking for a job, like they always helped. If they didn't know,
Yeah.
they would try real hard to find somebody. So yes, it's definitely the thing about ask somebody.
Amen. It is. Almost in everything if you're going to be an entrepreneur, a leader, whatever, the first step I always say is let go of the ego. Like be ready to, even though you're the leader and you're out there, there's always someone better, taller, faster, stronger, more educated, whatever. Lean into that. Like let
Right.
them advise accordingly. I am curious because I've worked on the nonprofit space again, more in health and wellness, but it's hard to navigate the nonprofits and not all of them are as transparent as some others are, and there's some shade in the game. Do you have any that you love or that in your opinion are doing it very, very well?
So there's a range, and when I start telling you this, I'm gonna forget some, so I'll feel terrible,
Okay.
right? The big ones I've had and seen people do some very, very positive things. The Wounded Warrior Project, Tunnel to Towers is doing some amazing things around homelessness. So those are the big ones, and there's a handful of really big ones. Some of the others that are really interesting is a group called the Warrior's Journey.
Okay.
Okay, these folks they have a religious slice to what they do. And I don't mean they're the Hare Krishna kind of converting everybody, but they understand purpose from a different perspective. And sometimes I think as we try to connect veterans to the community, we forget about faith. And they have a really good perspective. Um, let's see a couple others that come to mind. There's one called Vets to Industry. They help people get jobs and the like. There's a whole host of, but you're actually very right though, because sadly, I think there's like 40,000 out there. If just 5% of them are shady, that's a lot, right? So you do have to do your homework and pay attention. And it's pretty easy in this day and age, but there's some really good ones. And what's interesting about them is they're unknown, right? folks who will repair your home, folks who will help veterans who are in difficult situations. And they generally will do this for no request for money, right? They collect money elsewhere. They do amazing things. I learned about one person runs an organization which trains people to be watchmakers. This goes back all the way to World War II, right? And you think, okay, if you were disabled in a wheelchair coming out of World War II, when we were less enlightened about what that meant, you were off in another room. People didn't want it. Well, he was training them to be watchmakers, and it continues to this day. And folks can do this very quickly, can make in excess of $100,000 a year because there's not that many people know how to repair watches. And it's like this unbelievable calling to do this kind of thing, right? And so it's like they can't find enough people to do it. So there's just amazing things going on for veterans. And you're right, you got to look and you got to do your homework.
Yeah, absolutely. What a beautiful thing. I love when, I mean, like you said, I always say God, universe, Madonna, whatever you believe. I'm a big Madonna fan, but I always believe that there's larger order, and sometimes, all the time, things are pushing us in a certain direction, and it may not go exactly the way we want. And if we can broaden our perspective just enough, there might be something that is in line with your heart space, is in line with your purpose and in your skill set. It just didn't turn out exactly the way you thought it was going to go.
Yeah, and that's a really important point, Kristen, because a lot of people come up to me and say, "Oh, I'd like to start a nonprofit to help veterans," and I say, "Don't do that. Go volunteer to somebody who's already doing it, so you can realize how hard this is, right? And how much easier it is, and better, quite frankly, to join something that's really working well. Because there's so many people with so many passions. Chances are yours is being done somewhere."
Amen. And this is why consultants are so important. I don't think people always understand how valuable a consultant can be, or just straight up asking for advice or intel or questions, because people can save you navigating a whole path maybe you and I have already done, and being like, no, that's a good idea, but just do this. It'll be easier. You'll have more impact. You'll make more money, blah, blah, blah. So it kind of goes back to your initial point of just ask questions, get out there.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
That's amazing. Well, I love what you're doing. I don't think we have enough conversations around our veterans, how we support them personally, professionally, financially, the systems, all of it. So if you're listening, please go check out what Dr. Paul has going on in his book and all the things. And even if you're a part of the community, I encourage you to reach out. He's more than gracious in our scheduling and whatnot. So I know he's accessible and is building the community and has a big stamp. Tell us, where can we get your book? Any social media links, any websites you want to share?
Sure. The book's called Veterans Benefits for You. It's available on Amazon, sort of like everything, right? And like I said earlier, it's less than $20. So, you can afford it. You can afford to give as gift and the like. Okay. Like I said earlier, I'm on LinkedIn. That's where I do most of my stuff, is my name, Paul R. Lawrence, short videos, information about veterans and the like. Happy to answer direct messages and things like that to the extent I can. So that's kind of where I am, and try to get information out.
I love it. Well, thank you for for your service, number one, and number two, staying in it and helping, our leaders in this country and our humans of service. It's such a sacrifice, and it carries through their entire life. So the more we have support wise, community wise, mental health conversations, financial conversations, I think it's really, really important. And I'm excited to kind of keep tabs on what you do and see when the next book comes out.
Hey, great. Hey, thanks, Kristen. Thanks so much for caring about our veterans.
Absolutely. The quick thank you to our sponsors, Lux Neuro, Neurofeedback and Counseling. Lux Neuro wants to meet you. If you are ready to transform your life, visit them at luxneuro.com to schedule a consultation. Dr. Paul Lawrence, thank you for coming on. I will list all of his links and his book and everything in our notes. So please come check us out. We will be wherever you get your podcast, and look for these videos on YouTube. Cheers.
Thank you for joining Turmeric and Tequila with your host, Kristen Olson. Tune in next time, and don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.